Have you ever met a goddess of love who terrifies you to the core? In the brutal world of fear and hunger, the deity Sylvian wears many faces: mother of humanity, giver of life, symbol of fertility, yet her love is anything but gentle. From mysterious origins at the dawn of time to grotesque rituals that fuse souls into abominations, Sylvian's story is as haunting as it is fascinating. In this deep dive, we're going to uncover all the secrets of Sylvian across both fear and hunger games: the lore, the cults, the items, the inspirations, and the wild fan theories. And trust me, by the end, you might never look at a goddess of love the same way again. Right from the dawn of time in the game's mythology, Sylvian is there. She's an old god, one of the primordial deities, and her domain is fertility, love, lust, and creation. According to ancient lore, Sylvian created the first humans. How exactly? She commissioned a lesser deity named Vitruvia to draw a man and a woman in Sylvian's own divine likeness, fell in love with those designs, and then breathed life into mankind based on them. In the cosmology of fear and hunger, that makes Sylvian essentially the mother goddess of all people, the ultimate life giver. A beautiful role, right? But here's where things get complicated. Sylvian wasn't the only god around. She had a counterpart, and according to some tales, a consort in the old gods' pantheon, Grow-Goroth, the god of sacrifices and destruction. If Sylvian represents life and love, Grow-Goroth represents death and carnage, total opposites. Yet, like two sides of a cosmic coin, they're deeply connected. In fact, Sylvian and Grow-Goroth even had a child together, Venushka, the old god of nature. Life, death, and nature forming a twisted little family. It's almost poetic. Sylvian and Grow-Goroth embody a fundamental duality: creation versus destruction, love versus hate, life versus death. Some fans have even pointed out the resemblance to Freud's concept of Eros and Thanatos, the life drive and the death drive. Sylvian is essentially the game's personification of the life instinct, while Grow-Goroth embodies the death instinct, forever intertwined. At first, Sylvian truly loved humanity. The lore says she adored her children from the very first moments. She wanted humans to love her back and love each other in return. But here's the heartbreaking twist. Over time, Sylvian realized humans could never return her immense affection in equal measure. Think about that. A goddess whose love is so vast, so absolute, that no mere mortals could possibly reciprocate it. That one-sided love festered into disappointment, then into something darker. Sylvian's love blossomed into a more obsessive form, as one in game text puts it. She became a smothering mother, trying to force humanity down certain paths, with their best interest in mind, of course. And when mortals still failed to meet her expectations, her concept of love twisted into outright horror. What do I mean by horror? Well, Sylvian's idea of love started to include things like fusing people together or driving them into frenzies of debauchery. Her blessing to humanity was a form of magic aptly known as love magic, or flower magic, as the game calls it. But this isn't your standard fairy tale love spell. With Sylvian's magic, a gentle healing whisper is just one end of the spectrum. At the other end, you've got the power to create demon offspring by mating with a corpse. Yes, you read that correctly. We'll talk about that in a minute. Sylvian essentially reshaped mankind closer to her own image using these gifts. In her mind, She was showing humanity a more perfect form of love. In reality, it was utterly nightmarish. One infamous episode hinted at in the lore illustrates this nightmare. At one point in ancient history, humanity fell into a crazed orgy of fleshly delights. Picture it, a synchronized sea of naked bodies, countless men and women locked in endless, mindless coitus, pulsating and wasting away their days. An eternal, anonymous orgy. It sounds like something out of a hedonistic fever dream or a horror movie. The game's lore implies this was Sylvian's influence at work. Perhaps a time when her power over love and lust completely overtook people. It's a disturbing image. Love gone so far that it reduces humanity to writhing flesh, obsessed and lost. I don't know about you, but it gives me chills, imagining that scene in all its unnerving detail. Eventually, this twisted affection wasn't enough to keep Sylvian interested in humanity. The old gods grew distant as humans became more selfish and ambitious, even seeking to usurp the gods' positions. Sylvian was actually the first of the old gods to disappear from the world when the age of man's arrogance dawned. It's said she abandoned mankind eons ago, hurt and disillusioned. Grogoroth likely followed her out the cosmic door soon after. Humanity had decided they'd had enough of these ancient deities, and they eventually created their own new gods in the lore. But that's another story. The point is, by the time of the games, Sylvian is long gone, or so it seems. Yet her presence lingers like a ghost, or perhaps a mother who can't quite let go. So, a loving creator goddess becomes a distant, possibly scorned deity with a very warped idea of love. And that's just the background. Wait until you see how Sylvian's legacy manifests in the world. It's equal parts fascinating and horrifying. Sylvian's influence didn't vanish with her departure. It lived on through rituals, magic, and cult practices devoted to her. Remember that so-called love magic she gave to humans? The game shows us exactly how it works, and it's anything but romantic. Let's start with perhaps the most notorious Sylvian-inspired ritual, the marriage of flesh. In an ancient text describing Sylvian's ritual, it is said that, "I know of the second secret of Sylvian. I no longer have to fear separation from my loved ones, for we can forever join in a marriage of flesh. An act of love that creates a beautiful unison for two souls." Sounds almost touching in a twisted way, doesn't it? The marriage of flesh is essentially a Sylvian-blessed fusion ritual. Under Sylvian's blessing, two or more individuals can merge together, body, mind, and soul, into one being. It's the ultimate act of never being separated. In Sylvian's eyes, perhaps that's a lovely expression of love, literally becoming one with your beloved. In reality, the results are utterly grotesque. The new fused creature, simply called a marriage, is a writhing amalgamation of flesh that often defies nature. If two humans who are in love perform the ritual properly, the result might look vaguely human, just with too many limbs or eyes maybe. But more often, especially if different species are involved or the ritual goes wrong, you get a monstrosity. Imagine the thing but fueled by love instead of alien instinct. Yeah, that grotesque. How does one perform a marriage of flesh? In fear and hunger, the ritual has to take place at a Sylvian ritual circle, an altar inscribed with Sylvian's sigil. 2 or more willing participants must, well, show physical affection there, basically engage in intercourse right on the ritual circle. If Sylvian deems them worthy, their bodies start fusing, flesh knitting and twisting together in seconds. It's permanent and irreversible. The resulting being shares the memories and consciousness of all who were merged, to some extent at least, though usually one mind ends up dominant. In a sense, this marriage can be seen as a gift. The new creature is often physically stronger and more durable than a normal person. All their injuries are healed in the process too. For desperate lovers on the brink of death, fusing together can be a last resort to survive. And indeed, in the game's lore, once the dungeon of fear and hunger fell to supernatural chaos in 1590, many trapped people performed the ritual as a gambit to escape a worse fate. It's tragically ironic. The ritual meant to symbolize eternal love also doubles as a panic button in the face of horror. However, the downsides are huge. If the participants aren't truly in sync or lack Sylvian's favor, the marriage of flesh can fail spectacularly. A failed marriage often results in a crawling abomination, a mass of misshapen flesh that can't even move or speak properly. In one extreme case, 3 or more people fused into a so-called human hydra, a blob of bodies so enormous and malformed, it was basically immobile. Clearly, merging 3 or more souls is not a great idea. Even the successful triple fusion in the game results in a creature that, doesn't have working genitalia, suggesting it's an unhealthy state of being. And if you try to do the ritual without enough affinity to Sylvian, say, if you haven't honored her enough, she'll just reject you. And let's just say the participants don't survive the process. It's game over, literally, if the marriage ritual fails. In gameplay terms, it's a very high-risk, high-reward move. The visual of these marriages is disturbing in the extreme. The game shows some as minor enemies or encounters. One example is a merger of a man and his beloved wolf, resulting in a freakish 4-legged guard creature. Another is a yellow-robed mage fused with a lizard man, producing a twisted sorcerer chimera. And if the player character themselves performs a marriage of flesh, you transform into a deformed, multi-headed being, effectively trading your humanity for power. I still remember the first time I saw a marriage creature in-game. It was equal parts sad and horrifying. Sad, because you realize these monsters were people who loved someone so much, or were so desperate, they literally melted together. Horrifying, because, well, they look like something out of your worst nightmare. Sylvian's idea of a beautiful unison for 2 souls definitely isn't everyone's cup of tea. Interestingly, the concept of fusing lovers has some real-world mystical parallels. In alchemy, there's the idea of the alchemical wedding or conjunctio, where male and female forces unite into a perfect being. Often, it's symbolized as a king and queen merging into a hermaphroditic entity called the rebus. It's supposed to represent achieving perfection, the unity of opposites. Sylvian's marriage of flesh feels like a morbid riff on that idea. I mean, it literally creates a hermaphroditic being with 2 souls, sometimes even 2 heads. Of course, alchemists imagined a spiritual or symbolic union, whereas Sylvian makes it gruesomely literal. Leave it to fear and hunger to take an esoteric concept and crank it to body horror extremes. The game's creator, Miro Havarinen, actually cited a different inspiration, the 1999 film End of Days, which has a scene of Satan merging with people as the spark for the marriage of flesh concept. But it's hard not to notice the alchemical vibes too. Now, marriage of flesh is just one part of Sylvian's love magic. Let's talk about another, flower magic. The term flower magic might sound pleasant, but in Fear and Hunger, it covers Sylvian's whole arsenal of life-based spells, from healing to procreation, in extremely unorthodox ways. On the gentler side, we have abilities like Loving Whispers, a healing spell where concentrated whispers carried by Sylvian mend your wounds. It's literally Sylvian's voice cooing lovingly in your mind to knit your flesh back together. Rather sweet, aside from the sanity side effects. Yes, did I mention? The game notes that relying on Sylvian's healing too much may slowly erode your sanity. Devotion to the goddess of love can make you lose your mind over time fitting, isn't it? On the darker side of flower magic, we have spells like pheromones, likely used to lure or pacify foes through arousal, and the infamous demon seed. Demon seed is exactly what it sounds like. You implant your seed, yep, sexual connotation intended, into a fresh corpse, treating the dead body as the most fertile of growing grounds. What pops out is a demon kid, a grotesque baby demon that fights for you. It's one of the most jaw-dropping things you can do in the game, and it sits at the crossroads of Sylvian's and Grogoroth's domains, life and death magic working together. It's as if Sylvian is saying, even in death, life can bloom in a really messed up way. The first time I cast Demon Seed, I had this mix of disgust and dark glee as a wailing, horrific infant clawed its way out of the corpse I planted. Not gonna lie, it's gross, but it's also very Sylvian. Another strange gift of Sylvian's is the ability to cultivate brain flowers. These are exactly what they sound like. Flowers that look like brains, or perhaps use brains to grow. Some particularly devoted followers of Sylvian, especially those also attuned to her nature god offspring Venushka, can plant special seeds into corpses to grow brain flowers. In Fear and Hunger too, TERMINA, there's even a skill for it. You basically stick a seed in a fresh body, wait a while, and come back to harvest either a brain flower or a heart flower from the corpse. Morbid gardening, courtesy of Sylvian. These flowers have useful properties. The brain flower's stigma, when harvested, can be processed into a medicine that restores sanity to those who consume it. The heart flower, similarly, can heal physical wounds. It's as if Sylvian and Venushka together devised a way to grow human organs, brain, heart, in plant form. But of course, it comes with a catch. Brain flowers in the wild are parasitic and dangerous, often found sprouting from the skulls of unfortunate victims deep in the dungeon. The imagery is striking, beautiful but eerie flowers blooming out of dead bodies, offering both healing and mind manipulation. Sylvian's fingerprints are all over that concept, life and love emerging from death and decay. So, through marriages of flesh, demon seed, brain flowers, and healing whispers, Sylvian's love manifests in countless bizarre ways. It's creative and perverse at the same time. What I find fascinating is how these gifts illustrate Sylvian's character. She genuinely represents love and life. She heals. She gives fertility. She creates new forms of life. But because her perspective is utterly alien and godly, these miracles come out twisted. It's like she's saying, if you won't love me back the way I want, I'll remake you and your world until you do. That obsession and disappointment we discussed earlier, it flows through every spell and ritual, Her love always has thorns. Even being healed by Sylvian's magic might slowly drive you mad. It's such a brilliant subversion of the usual benevolent mother goddess trope. In fear and hunger, even love can be lethal. Even though Sylvian left the mortal realm ages ago, people in the world of fear and hunger didn't just forget the goddess of love. In fact, cults dedicated to Sylvian persisted throughout history, albeit often driven underground. After all, worshipping a deity of fertility and lust tends to involve, shall we say, taboo activities. The most notable of these cults are the infamous bunny masks. If you stumble into the hidden backyard garden of the dungeons in Fear and Hunger, the first game, you'll find a scene that's equal parts absurd and unsettling. A group of completely naked people wearing rabbit masks, all quietly participating in an endless orgy. These are the bunny mask cultists, fervent followers of Sylvian. They believe the highest honor they can offer their goddess is exactly what she wants: men and women making love in her name. So that's what they do, in a secluded meadow lit by moonlight. A wordless, ritualistic group sexual ceremony, over and over. It's almost hypnotic. When I first found them in game, I was struck by the eerie silence of it. Just the sound of crickets and, well, bodies, I guess, while these devotees moved in a trance. The narrative describes it as an atmosphere of complete silence and intense focus, where it's hard to even tell if the participants are feeling pleasure or pain. They're effectively in a trance state, lost in the act, and time means nothing to them. This is worship for them. This is how they pray to Sylvian. Why the rabbit masks, you ask? On the symbolic level, rabbits are classic icons of fertility. They breed like, well, rabbits. The bunny masks likely use the rabbit as Sylvian's sacred animal, a representation of rampant procreation. In fact, in real-world myth, rabbits are associated with spring and fertility, and even tie into the imagery of Eostre, a pagan fertility goddess. Think of the Easter bunny, same roots. It's a clever little detail that grounds Sylvian's cult in familiar symbolism. The bunny mask is both unnerving and meaningful. Of course, within the game, it's also just creepy as hell, faceless, grinning bunny faces staring into the void while doing that. It leaves an impression. From a gameplay perspective, the bunny masks even offer the player a deal. One of the cultists, a woman at the edge of the orgy, will invite you to join. First one's free, she says, with a sort of inviting monotony. If you accept, your character steps forward and basically joins the rite. The screen tactfully fades out a bit, but it's clear what's happening. As a result, Sylvian blesses you. All your wounds are healed completely, and you gain a tire of affinity with Sylvian, which, as we discussed, is like favor with the goddess. It's actually a huge benefit, free full heal, and a boost to your powers. No wonder the cultist said the first one's free, because if you try it a second time, well, Sylvian doesn't like greed. On the second attempt, the game forces a coin flip, a recurring risk mechanic in Fear and Hunger. If luck fails you, your character this time does not snap out of the sexual trance. Instead, you lose yourself completely, essentially joining the endless orgy forever. And that's an instant game over. You literally drown in Sylvian's love, unable to break free. That is the danger of the bunny mask cult. One moment you're indulging in healing pleasures. The next you're a mindless addition to the pile of flesh, presumably until you die of exhaustion. The game warns that participating too much can make you unable to break free from the trance-like state. A little indulgence in Sylvian's sacrament can save you, but too much and it consumes you. There's that theme again, love with a dangerous edge. The bunny masks aren't just nameless weirdos either. They tie into the story in unexpected ways. In Fear and Hunger, too, Termina, one of the playable characters, Dawn, turns out to have a tragic connection to Sylvian's cult. Dawn grew up as the neglected child of two bunny mask cultists. His parents were so zealously devoted to their orgies and rituals that they often left young Dawn alone for days, disappearing off to worship Sylvian. Eventually, they never returned at all, presumably. They succumbed to the ritual, losing themselves entirely in the endless act. And Dawn was left orphaned. Can you imagine? It's one thing to hear about nameless people being lost to a sex cult, but to realize a main character's family literally loved their goddess more than their own child. It's heart-wrenching. Dawn, understandably, has issues, to put it mildly, and his story provides a very human perspective on Sylvian's influence. The cult of love isn't all happiness. It destroys families. It's a subtle way the game shows the dark side of fanatical love. Sylvian's followers and imagery also crop up in other parts of society by the time of Termina, which is set in the late 1940s, on the cusp of an industrial era. Even though the old gods are less popular by then, Sylvian's cultural footprint remains. For example, the capital city of Bohemia, Prehevil, has a central town square, literally named Sylvian's Square. Historically, that square used to host the city's largest brothel. No surprise, right? A brothel at the heart of a district named after the fertility goddess. The interesting and telling part is that this brothel was shut down by the church in the early 20th century. Marina, a character in Termina, explains that the church, presumably the dominant religion of the new gods, or perhaps Almer's church, closed Sylvian's Square brothel to regulate human desires and eliminate any competition in controlling people's basic urges. Her own father was apparently involved in that moral crackdown. This bit of lore shows a conflict between the old ways and the new. Sylvian's cult of free love and fertility was seen as a threat to the more puritanical, orderly church that rose to power. Sex, lust, and uncontrolled love are viewed as something that needed stamping out, which is very on-brand for, say, a monotheistic church in a post-medieval society. Sylvian's name being literally wiped off the map by closing her square's function symbolizes how the modern world tried to bury the old god's influence. But it's still there. The square still bears her name, and one gets the sense that behind closed doors, the old cults are not entirely dead. In fact, the wartime regime in Termina, the Bremen Empire, which is an analog to a fascist World War II era power, might have dabbled in Sylvian's gifts for their own twisted ends. There are clues that the empire conducted secret experiments using the marriage of flesh ritual to create super soldiers. Within the occupied town of Prehevil, you encounter some Bremen troopers and commanders who just look off. They're human, but something about their anatomy is subtly wrong. Proportions uncanny, strength inhuman. One character notes that these soldiers' bodies are from an uncanny valley, clearly modified by some unholy experiments. The wiki notes that these Sylvian trooper enemies are implied results of Sylvian marriages being weaponized. Essentially, the Empire might have forced soldiers to fuse with others, or with animals, or who knows what, to create more formidable fighters. The Sylvian trooper optional boss in TERMINA is actually a woman fused with her own unit, called platoon, a single being made out of multiple soldiers. The term platoon for a creature is a chilling hint. It's not a squad of soldiers. It's literally a squad fused into one monstrosity. If that isn't a grotesque parody of unity, I don't know what is. Sylvian's power, meant to unite lovers, being applied to merge platoons. It's a dark joke from the developers and a terrifying concept. It suggests that even modern regimes in the game's world couldn't resist tapping into the old god's power if it served their agenda. And it adds a layer of tragedy. Those troopers essentially underwent a forced marriage of flesh. They're Sylvian's children in a way, but born of cruelty, not love. So, from orgiastic forest cults to wartime abominations, Sylvian's legacy runs deep. Culturally, she's remembered and yet reviled by the powers that be. The traditional church views her worship as taboo. Sex cults and fertility rites are a no-no in the New Order. And common folk likely view Sylvian's practices with a mix of superstition and disgust, understandably. Yet, people still secretly partake in them when desperation hits. If you're starving and wounded in a dungeon full of monsters, and you stumble on a hidden garden of bunny masks who offer miraculous healing through an orgy, you might just take that offer. Morals get blurry when survival is on the line. Fear and hunger excels at pushing those boundaries. What will you do to survive? Would you violate taboos? Would you join an occult ritual? Sylvian's presence is exactly that temptation in the game. Before we move on, one more detail about Sylvian's iconography in the world. Her symbol is interesting. Traditionally, Sylvian's mark is described as the shape of an open eye. Some players have noticed that the ritual circles for Sylvian resemble an eye as well, with a kind of iris motif. In TERMINA, a new symbol appears for her, a vertical slit shape. This can be interpreted a few ways. It might still be an eye, seen sideways. It might be a stylized vulva, fitting for a fertility goddess, or even a subtle nod to a rabbit's head or ears. Perhaps it's all of the above, a clever triple meaning symbol. The open eye could imply awareness, enlightenment, or the all-seeing mother watching her children. The vulva is clearly fertility and creation, and the rabbit head loops back to her cult's rabbit icon. It's quite elegant how much meaning they packed into a simple emblem. So, when you wander through Prehevel and see a statue with that mark, or find an occult book with the eye symbol on its cover, you know Sylvian's shadow is there. At this point, we've learned about Sylvian's lore and how people worship her, for better or worse. But what about meeting Sylvian herself? Is that even possible if she left the world? For a deity who supposedly abandoned humanity long ago, Sylvian still finds a way to show up in person, or at least in partial form, during the events of fear and hunger. In the first game, if you're playing on the challenging modes, the aptly named Terror and Starvation mode, or Hard mode, you can encounter something extraordinary and terrifying, the traces of Sylvian. This is essentially a boss fight against a fragment of Sylvian's essence, deep in the darkness of the dungeon. Picture this: you're in the literal void, a surreal, otherworldly part of the dungeon, and you come across a wooden path suspended in nothingness. Suddenly, The greenish hue of that void starts to swirl around you, making you dizzy. And then she emerges, Sylvian, or at least a manifestation of her. The game calls it Traces of Sylvian, implying that the real goddess is far greater, but even this echo of her is immensely powerful. Visually, she's depicted as a nightmarish amalgam of feminine and floral and fleshy. A mass of tentacles, a vaguely human female form at its core, but utterly alien. True to her fertility theme, the artwork for Sylvian's form shows exaggerated sexual characteristics, multiple breasts, a head that is disturbingly phallus-shaped, and plenty of yonic imagery as well. It's as if every reproductive organ got combined into one monstrous being, both beautiful in an artistic sense and deeply uncomfortable to behold. I remember just staring at the sprite art, half in awe at the detail, and half cringing because, yeah, it's basically genitals meets eldritch horror. In gameplay, this boss fight is notorious. Traces of Sylvian is one of the strongest entities in the game, rightfully so, since she's an old god. Her mass of tentacles isn't just for show. Each tentacle can lash out with tremendous force, inflicting heavy damage and even status effects like bleeding or stun. She can entangle your party members in her tendrils, completely paralyzing them. She can even attack your mind. One of her signature moves is called Color from the Unknown, which unleashes a wave of alien light that crushes the party's sanity. Mind stat. Fun fact, Color from the Unknown is likely a nod to Lovecraft's Color Out of Space, a tale of a strange color that drives people mad, very fitting for Sylvian's cosmic horror vibe. Facing her feels less like a battle and more like trying to survive a confrontation with a force of nature or a Lovecraftian god. You can't brute force it easily. You have to strategize, sever her tentacles one by one to weaken her. And even then, her head, the core, has an enormous well of health. If you manage to prevail, Sylvian doesn't die. Of course not. You can't kill a god, especially not an old god. Instead, upon defeat, the Traces of Sylvian simply lets the player go and descends back into the green hue whence she came. The game basically tells you that Sylvian was only toying with you, humoring your challenge. That sends a shiver down my spine. After all that effort, all those desperate moves to survive, the goddess essentially pats you on the head like, okay, I'm done playing. Off you go. It implies that what we fought was just a minuscule fragment of her true power, a shadow of a shadow. If she'd taken us seriously, we wouldn't stand a chance. This is confirmed by the fact that Fear and Hunger has similar trace fights with other gods, like Rogaroth, and they all kind of suggest the same thing. The old gods are limitless, and you, a mortal, can only ever contend with a tiny aspect of them. It's humbling, in a dark way. Sylvian essentially chooses to let you win that encounter. Perhaps it amuses her that one of her beloved children dared to face their mother. Who knows what an old god thinks? Interestingly, if you try the pacifist approach and talk to Sylvian during that fight, your character is overwhelmed with primal fear and can't speak. There's no reasoning with a being like that. It's like an ant trying to negotiate with a human foot, about to step on it. The lore reason behind these trace encounters, as gleaned from endings and dialogues, is that the old gods, like Sylvian, stuck around just long enough to test humanity's resolve. And once convinced of humanity's ignorance and selfishness, they left completely. The fear and hunger ending bee even shows humans glimpsing an old god's pure idea and failing to grasp it. Sylvian's trace fight might be part of that narrative. She's an optional challenge, not required for the main ending. But if you do meet her, you get a taste of the cosmic scale of these beings. Aside from that epic boss battle, Sylvian appears in more subtle ways. Throughout the dungeon, you'll find statues of various gods. There is indeed a Sylvian statue hidden in the caverns. If you pray at her statue, or any old god statue, you actually gain some affinity with that god. Sylvian's statue prayer is one way to start learning her magic. Remember those loving whispers and such. However, caution. Praying to one god too much can offend another, or praying to multiple might reset affinity. It's like gods get jealous, which fits Sylvian's personality actually. The game explicitly says, if you pray at the wrong altar that isn't theirs, you can lose favor. Sylvian, being the goddess of love, wants loyalty. Then there are ritual circles with Sylvian's symbol, scattered in the dungeon. If you have a skin Bible of Sylvian, an occult book written by a character named Enki, you can use it to learn how to draw Sylvian's sigil on those ritual circles. Doing so allows you to perform special actions. You can pray to Sylvian formally at these circles for affinity. 3 prayers equals 1 affinity level. Or you can perform the marriage of flesh at them, as we discussed, to mega boost affinity and become a marriage. It's a tangible way the player interacts with Sylvian's presence. In essence, even though she's not physically around, her sigils still respond to those who know the rites. It feels almost like calling an old phone number that still forwards to a voicemail. Sylvian left the world, but her power set up in those circles still picks up the call and grants you what you ask for a price. There are also books and scrolls that talk about Sylvian inside the game. We saw excerpts from studies of Sylvian armor and the skin Bible of Sylvian earlier, which essentially summarize her lore and philosophy. There's mention of a Church of Sylvian having authored healing scrolls, which implies that at some point in history, there was an organized religion around her, possibly separate from or preceding the bunny mask style cults. The scroll of the Church of Sylvian is an item you can find. Using it will instantly teach a character Sylvian's healing skill, loving whispers. I find that interesting. Even the knowledge of Sylvian, encapsulated in writing, has power. It shows how widespread her influence was, enough that medieval scholars or priests of Sylvian wrote treatises on her magic for others to learn. It's easy to imagine there were monasteries or shrines in that world where healers would pray to Sylvian for miracles, perhaps before her cult went fully carnal. Moving to fear and hunger too, TERMINA, Sylvian's direct presence is less overt. No giant tentacle boss fight this time, but she still felt everywhere if you know where to look. We already talked about her cult's impact on a character's backstory, Dan, and the city's layout, Sylvian Square. There's also a collectible skin Bible of Sylvian in TERMINA, which one of the playable characters, Osa, can even start with. Reading it reiterates her lore, with some extra emphasis on how her love turned obsessive and controlling, and mentions that the mark of Sylvian raises the otherworldly protection of its wielder. In gameplay, if you gain Sylvian's affinity and essentially receive her mark, blessing, your character gets extra defense against otherworldly damage, a handy buff hinting that Mommy Sylvian is watching over you, defending you from rival gods maybe. Also in TERMINA, There's an item literally called Eye of Sylvian, described as possibly an actual eye of the goddess. Equipping the Eye of Sylvian massively boosts all your healing, 50% more effective healing from anything. And it stacks if you manage to get multiple, which is lore-wise crazy, having 2 of Sylvian's eyes. It's one of those rare, powerful accessories, clearly tied to Sylvian's domain of restoration. The item flavor text wonders how on earth an Eye of Sylvian wound up in someone's possession. A little mystery in itself. Did someone steal the eye of a goddess? Or is it metaphorical? Given Sylvian's symbol is an eye, perhaps it's an artifact carrying that symbol's power. And of course, TERMINA showcases the aftermath of Sylvian's influence through those Bremen experiments, Sylvian trooper and platoon boss. It's more implied storytelling, but when you fight those, you can actually use Dawn's skill diagnose on the corpse. Dan notes something very unscientific. The trooper's anatomy is uncanny and doesn't match the usual mutation plague in the city. He muses that it might be due to some unholy Bremen experiments, likely referencing forced marriages of flesh on soldiers. That's such a cool cross-link between gameplay, using a modern doctor's skill, and lore, revealing Sylvian's touch in a new context. It kind of leaves you wondering, how far did the Empire go with Sylvian's rituals? Did they have cultists or scholars who rediscovered her methods? It's a mystery not fully answered, but tantalizing. Speaking of mysteries, Sylvian's current status remains an enigma. We know she left, and only traces remain. But where did she go? The lore says Sylvian and the old gods retreated to their own domains, maybe another dimension or plane of existence. Sylvian is said to hail from the green hue, which might be a poetic term for her ethereal realm of life. When you fight her trace, she emerges from and returns to a green void, reinforcing that idea. Will she ever come back fully? Does she influence events from afar? These questions are open. Some fans theorize Sylvian might have subtly guided certain events. For instance, one theory posits that Sylvian had an interest in Lagarde, the main captive character in Fear and Hunger 1, because his goal was to unify humanity under one rule. If he succeeded, in one ending, he becomes a new god, the Yellow King. That's a sort of forced unity of mankind, which could be seen as fulfilling Sylvian's desire for everyone to be together, if not literally fused, then at least under one banner. It's speculative, but an intriguing idea. Sylvian the matchmaker, trying to arrange the world to her liking behind the scenes. What we do know from the developer is a bit more straightforward. Miro Havarinen, the creator, shared a couple of tidbits about Sylvian. He said that Sylvian's visual design was heavily inspired by the ancient statues of Artemis, Diana, of Ephesus, which depict the goddess with many breasts. If you've seen those Artemis statues, they're quite famous archaeological artifacts. They show the goddess covered with what look like dozens of breasts, or sometimes eggs all over her chest, symbols of abundance and fertility. Miro apparently saw a photograph of one such statue, especially a fountain version where water flows from those breasts, and that spurred his imagination for Sylvian's look. If you compare, you can absolutely see the resemblance. Sylvian's depictions in the game's books show her with multiple breasts and a very fecund Mother Earth vibe. It's Artemis of Ephesus dialed up to horror fantasy level. It's also a nice nod to how Fear and Hunger often draws on real-world mythology and then gives it a dark twist. Artemis, Diana, was a virginal huntress in Greek myth, but in Ephesus, she was worshipped as a fertility goddess. Miro took that fertility aspect and blended it with something more ominous and, more phallic in Sylvian's case. As for Sylvian's name, interestingly, it wasn't picked from any specific myth or language meaning. Miro revealed that he actually came up with Sylvian's spur of the moment during a pen and paper RPG session with friends. He invented the goddess back then, and the name just stuck when he made the video game years later. It's kind of funny. In Latin, Sylvan relates to forests, and one might think of Sylvia or Sylvanus, Roman woodland gods. But apparently, it's a coincidence. It just sounds ethereal and feminine, and now we can't imagine her called anything else. Before we wrap up, let's not forget one last aspect, psychologically. Sylvian represents something very primal in the fear and hunger narrative. We touched on the eros, life and love, versus thanatos, death idea. Throughout the games, you see this theme, survival and procreation impulses, fear and hunger, if you will, against destruction and despair. Sylvian is that life urge, cranked into overdrive. If Grogorath is literally hunger, cannibalism, sacrifice, and Almer, the new gods embody fear, the controlling order, perhaps, then Sylvian is like the chaotic counterpoint of desire and attachment. Some analyses even frame Sylvian's influence as representing Freudian lust and egoic attachment, which must be overcome or balanced. I find it fascinating that a horror game can invite these interpretations. It's why Sylvian stands out. She's not just a spooky fertility goddess. She's an entire commentary on how love and pleasure can lead to oblivion if unchecked. Sylvian's story in Fear and Hunger is a haunting tapestry of love, lust, life, and loss. She begins as the benevolent mother of all, gifting humanity with existence and affection, and ends up as a distant, scorned god whose love warps into nightmares. Through her, the games explore that razor-thin line between ecstasy and agony, between comfort and horror. The mysteries around her, why she left, what truly became of her, linger like an unanswered whisper. But one thing is clear. Sylvian's presence is felt everywhere in the world of fear and hunger. From the writhing masses of the bunny mask orgies to the fused flesh of desperate lovers. From the healing warmth of a loving whisper to the cold gaze of a giant open-eye symbol in an abandoned square. Talking about Sylvian almost feels like talking about an estranged parent of humanity in that universe. She loved too much, and humanity couldn't love her back the same way. In that heartbreak, something beautiful curdled into something terrifying. And yet, it's hard not to feel a tinge of pity for her amidst the revulsion. Sylvian embodies a kind of cosmic loneliness, a goddess who gave everything and eventually got fed up with ungrateful children. Her solutions, like binding those children together in flesh forever, are horrific, yes, but also tragically telling of her desperation for connection. In the end, Fear and Hunger uses Sylvian to remind us that even the most exalted ideals, love, unity, creation, can become monstrous when twisted by obsession or absolute power. It flips the script on the typical love deity. Instead of a comforting mother or a Cupid figure, we get Sylvian, whose love can literally consume you. And as players or lore enthusiasts, we're left both horrified and intrigued. The next time you see a rabbit or a many-breasted statue, You might just shudder thinking of Sylvian's hidden cult. And if you ever find yourself in a grim dungeon with only one way to heal, well, Sylvian's arms and tentacles are always open. But be careful what you wish for. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Sylvian's lore and mysteries. It's been a wild journey through forbidden gardens and ancient texts, one that truly shows how rich and dark the world of fear and hunger is. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe, and maybe think twice before accepting any free offers from strange folks in rabbit masks. After all, love can be a dangerous thing.